Servus Leute, willkommen zurück zu einem konsequent frei Podcast. Heute mal ein etwas anderes Format. Ich habe heute mal einen Briten eingeladen und wir werden uns erstmal anhören, wie so das Spielfeld in Großbritannien aufgebaut ist und werden dann auch mal versuchen herauszufinden, ob die Tories oder die Konservativen in Großbritannien oder die CDU die linkeste Partei von Europa ist. Ja, und dann werden wir noch ein paar andere interessante Themen anreißen. Also genau, haltet euch fest und seid gewarnt, dieses Mal ist es sogar auf Englisch. All right, thank you for joining me tonight. Would you like to introduce yourself at first?
Yeah, sure. I'm Carl Herman Habermas. I'm a Praxarchy contributor, and I've occupied this space since about 2014. As of recent, I've gone from just a passive consumer of the sphere to someone more active within it. I've been around since about Gamergate.
Just briefly explain what Praxarchy is. Most German viewers probably won't know that.
Oh yeah, it's an online, I suppose you'd call it, student newspaper, though it's not affiliated with any universities or anything, but it follows that format where people write in, submissions get accepted. It's generally following the standard sensible central line of thought. And I've written maybe 5 or 6 articles. I'm not the most prolific contributor, but I'm fairly prolific. So if you ever wanted to check me out, it's through there and Substack, really.
Like you mentioned Gamergate. Like what exactly is that and how did you become political?
It was a largely regrettable social movement that went way beyond its bounds, really, but it's become something actually useful. It originated with a story that got way out of hand about a woman who had made mediocre indie games, and in exchange for sexual favors, she was allowed to have higher scores than were perhaps warranted. And this became a focal point for the state of the gaming industry, and gamers were rather disquieted about it. And it then broadened into understanding why feminism was entering video games and critiquing that, but it was a largely reactive thing. And eventually it became overtly political with the rise of populism, and Donald Trump and a lot of these movements merged into one another. It was really the online version of populism that it became, the anti-SJW crowd, if you remember that. It eventually got killed by YouTube, though, as they brought in changes to the algorithm and censorship laws kicked in, demonetization, things like that. A lot of the refugees have ended up in the DR, at least from the Anglo sphere.
I remember this time not too well, but I think there were like a couple of names, yes, that are still around. Sargon of Akkad, most people I think know. He now started his own little project, Lotus Eaters, I think. But I remember back then there was like a real optimism and some kind of energy you could really feel. And this brings us now to basically the discussion, which is going to be the main topic, which is going to be a general overview of the landscape in Great Britain and the comparison between the so-called conservative parties in each country, the CDU in Germany and the Tories in Great Britain. There was so much energy in there. The populace really, really, really didn't want all this progressive bullshit, but most of that just either got contained, just dissipated away, or just faded into nothing. So I think it's really interesting for German viewers to really see the similarities between the so-called conservative parties, which I would rather call the containment parties. Yeah, just go ahead and tell our viewers what exactly the landscape in Great Britain looks like.
Sorry, I was just thinking it's rather funny as an Anglo looking at the CDU, and the Germans interpret that as a party of dissent, or perhaps the votes for that were a party of dissent, where we always perceived it as essentially the party responsible for immigration, and they were quite overt about it. But the Conservative Party was slightly different, where with David Cameron, who was the PM up until about 2015-16, I think the Brexit vote anyway, he had said he didn't want immigration. And there was a right-wing party flanking them called UKIP, which essentially forced him to unite the party by calling a referendum, which the British came out and gave a vote that he didn't expect, 52% voting to leave, which was, in essence, a verdict on immigration. This was then subverted by the Tory party, who were given the mandate, because essentially anyone who was in that party did not want Brexit, and if they did, it was not for the same reasons. They thought of it as a commercial opportunity or a way to get immigrants from, say, Hong Kong. And you were then asking the majority who didn't want it in the first place to implement your will. And we had an exercise of performative failure with Theresa May, and eventually that led to Boris Johnson coming in an election against Corbyn, and he said he would get Brexit done, and he got a sweeping mandate from the country. Areas that hadn't been anything but Labour since 1952 were suddenly giving him the vote. And then the mandates happened, and this quasi-libertarian leader locked us down. I'm not sure we had the hardest rules in Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if that went to the Germans, but it was certainly not something that the populace was enthused about. Then we had an election as he got ousted for various reasons, mainly that he had ridden the populist wave. And I think that the Conservatives as a whole were displeased with that. So then we had an election of 6 members. There was one who was quite popular because of her aggressive anti-immigration stance. Once they saw she was gaining popularity, they decided to end the voting process and selected their 2 favourites, one of which was a man called Rishi Sunak, the other was Liz Truss. Liz Truss gets in for 44 days, does policies that the party doesn't like, and they oust her and put in the man they always wanted, which was Rishi Sunak. We're having by-elections at the moment, and they're set to lose 1,000 seats. Well, they did lose 1,000 seats, my apologies. That is ridiculous. It's not something that happens if you are from Germany and aren't familiar with the way our council elections work. They are now on track to have the worst election results I think the Tory party has ever seen, either since its inception or since the 1800s. And that's because of Rishi Sunak and their consistent betrayal. All Labour had to do was pivot and flank to the right of them, quite disingenuously, and we've ended up in a position where we are now, which is all that energy has been diffused and brought back in through Labour to establishment energy.
So to recap for a quick moment, basically the political cinematic universe, the PCU narrative, is that the evil right-wing Tories are doing like conservative things. At least they campaign with it, or did campaign with it. Now they're actually campaigning left-leaning politics, and the so-called Labour left party is campaigning with pretty based right-wing platforms. So yeah, they consistently basically lied and just cemented in the progressive victories. Is that a good, is that a
Yes.
fitting?
Yes, it is. I mean, an example on it just quickly for immigration would be that when Cameron was elected, he promised to put a hard cap on immigration at 50,000.
Cameron, which party was he?
He was a Conservative. He got elected in 2010. And now, just to show how that's gone, Rishi Sunak has now reneged on his promise to keep the hard cap at 200,000. So you can see that trajectory has just gone up and up and up, and we're set for...
I read somewhere that last year or so, Great Britain had the largest amount of immigration ever recorded, like almost reaching a million.
Yes.
So basically, you voted to get out of the EU to curb immigration, and the establishment basically said, well, screw your popular will, screw democracy, and just you get more immigration than ever before. So really... Yes. Really interesting. And our main topic today is the comparison. Who is the most left-leaning party in Europe? Is it the CDU or the Tories? Given all that, what you just told, it's probably a really, really close fight. You told us about the 2 most prominent parties, the Labour, which really got off under Tony Blair, and the Tories. But are there like other contending parties, like, for example, similar to the AfD in Germany or like the Greens or whatever? Or is it just like in America, you have 2 big blocks basically taking up every bit of space?
No, there are several parties, all of which have been unsuccessful. To list off the 3 that come to mind immediately, most recent ones have been Reform and Heritage. I know there's a couple others in the last couple of years. They failed completely. I don't know if they even got a seat in the last council election between them.
Why do you think they failed?
There's multiple reasons. A lot of it is we have the first past the post system. So as opposed to proportional representation in Germany. If you have an area and the Conservatives get 5,000 votes and you get 4,999 votes for your party gets nothing under any context. Those votes essentially don't matter. So we have cases like with UKIP where they got something like 3 million votes in one of the more recent elections, and it translated to next to no seats at all, less than 10, I think. So with these parties, they don't stand a chance unless they're going for extremely targeted campaigns, or they're going for a very, very broad appeal, mass marketing, things like that. And even then, there's going to be a lot of reticence because people will feel like they're wasting their votes.
Yeah.
So there also was a problem with basic optics. I mean, Reform UK, I think they had a woman go on stage, most likely autistic, very meandering, very insecure of themselves, what they're saying, and unsure of themselves. And they've done this obviously to avoid any comparisons with other unsavory people that might have came up in the past. And it's failed. There are earlier ones, like the British National Party, when immigration was the main. Immigration has always stayed steadily the top priority for at least 30% of the country, rising to over 50%. If you compare 1997 statistics to 2008 on the topic of immigration, as it gets worse and worse and worse, even with the youngest demographic, it goes to the majority of people are saying we have far too much immigration. And that's standardized across all demographics anyway, of age. So these, with the BNP, they were outmaneuvered. Their leader died young, who was, not their leader, he was their main speaker, a man called Jonathan Bowden. He died young, and legislation came in under the Labour Party that essentially banned parties that are explicitly pro-native in infrastructure terms. So they disabled them.
That is really interesting, because they are trying to do that in Germany right now, because in like labeling anything that says, like, even mentions that there are like ethnic Germans or like native Germans, to be like against our constitution. So basically outlawing it. They're trying to do that right now, but it seems like in Great Britain it actually went through already.
Well, it was more of a case that they were always on the verge of being a prescribed organization. And even then, they were still sweeping up tons and tons of at least council seats. But their issue was when they brought in diversity, equity, and inclusion laws. I think it was either the Equality or the Communications Act, something like that. And it said that, well, you can't discriminate on multiple levels. And if you're a native party and you need to maintain basic infrastructure, party apparatus, things like that, it's just not going to work. That was an effective way of killing it. They're sweeping up a lot of the dissident right by essentially having infiltrators. There's a man called Matthew Goodwin, I believe, who dedicated his entire life to writing books to counter extremism, particularly from the right. And now you can find that man on the Lotus Eaters, for example, or doing the dissident right-wing sphere. There are tons and tons of people who are suspected of having affiliations or have been paid by places like the Henry Jackson Society, which are your standard neo-lib global homo institutions under the conservatives. And they're sent in to essentially distort and subvert spheres like this and bring them back into the fold. Unheard is a good example. Magazine places like that, they're set up for those purposes. So we have a lot more. I would dare say that the managerialism in Germany might be harder, particularly with what they've done with the AfD youth as of recent.
They tried to label it as proven extremist, but they had to take it back, at least for now. But we'll see how whatever things they'll come up in the future. But that's a interesting development, especially with the AfD youth. They really grew up in the sense of becoming really professional in their and how they act, how they present themselves. So things like you mentioned in when most of the British new parties, where they had like real bad PR mishaps, most of that doesn't really happen anymore at least in the AfD youth. They got it pretty tightly organized. So at least that's a good thing. But as we see, just getting a party off the ground is, or even getting into parliament is not really enough, because there's a whole containment machine operating in the background. And if you really want to dig into that topic, the Evelyn and Scrum Monkey, they did a lot of streams on that, detailing every bit of every tool and basically the toolbox that regime uses to contain any force, right-wing force in Great Britain. That's really blackpilling. All right, now let's get to our main topic. Before comparing actual facts, who would you say is the more left-wing party, the CDU or the Tories?
Well, it's tough to say. From an outsider's perspective, Germany, in terms of wokeness, is a bit like the heart of darkness, where you just stare into it and it seems like the abyss.
I would actually say exactly the same thing about Britain.
Well, there
which
you go.
Is okay, this is going to be interesting. So, all right. So we heard a lot about the Tories right now, and it looks pretty rough, if I dare say so. But let's just go a bit about the CDU. And they started after World War II, and the first chancellor of Germany was from the CDU. And back then, if you look at posters from that time, they were actually quite based. They had like a poster in, I think, in the 50s, where they, which literally said, the whole Germany it should be, das ganze Deutschland soll es sein, and where they had like the whole lost East provinces on there, and promised we want to unify Germany. And if you want to talk about grifters, like they started even in the 50s grifting about that, because like their actual actions are basically, yeah, the good little dogs of the Americans. Just like the East had its own good little dog in the form of the SED, you had the same with the CDU in Germany. Basically, just trying to channel the existing conservative energy in Germany and channeling it into basically doing progressive things. Even the so-called Wirtschaftswunder, you can't really put it on the list of achievements from the CDU. It was a different party, the FDP, which is more like a very liberal, but back then it was market liberal and like LibCon, you would also say. Nowadays, it's just like a typical Lib Dem party, completely left-wing, subversive, and evil. But back then, you had one guy, Ludwig Erhard, who basically overnight, while the Americans were away, lifted all the Keynesian restrictions on the German economy and basically jump-started the German Wirtschaftswunder. Even right now, if you look at it, or how we call her Mutti, which basically is a derogatory term for mother, Angela Merkel, as basically all of you knew. She governed pretty long time. She was basically our Tony Blair, except that right now she doesn't seem to do any politics work afterwards, whereas Tony Blair, by stepping down as prime minister, basically got a promotion. So yeah, she when you look at speeches she gave back in 2008 or before that, she was talking about like German lead culture, basically not getting any immigrants in, and staying true to the original and whatever, like basic conservative talk. But as everybody knows, once she had control of the party, she basically purged the whole party out of any dissenting voice, made the party even more left-wing than it was even back then. And now it's like trying to find a actual relevant difference between the CDU, the Green Party, or the SPD, like the Social Democrats. It's not really possible. It's like one whole block, and that's mostly thanks to Merkel. She deconservatized the CDU. And what the CDU right now does, they financed 1 billion euros against the right. Like they literally called that a program while they were in government, I think, which was called 1 billion against the right. You know, you can't get more obvious than that. The most important thing, they opened the borders. Like it wasn't the lefties or the Greens that did all that. It was Angela Merkel. Right now, we are in Germany having a huge downturn in the economy. And yes, some of that is due to the sanctions against Russia and everything, and some Green Party policies. But most of the crisis, for example, shutting down the nuclear power plants, it was all the CDU. Like, they ruled this country since basically 2008. Basically everything that Germany is doing right now, how bad it's doing right now, it's their fault. Every leftist subversion, they could have stopped, but they didn't. And in fact, they actually pushed it forward. So, I mean, maybe we can do a poll, if that is possible, on YouTube later, where the audience can decide which one is actually more left-wing. One thing I'm really interested in, what did you guys get over there on your island about like German politics, especially Merkel and what she did?
In regards to Merkel, we picked up on that she was referred to as Mama Merkel, and it was derogatory, so much so that we started calling her Mama Merkel. And when it comes to what she did, if someone said Merkel in England, it meant mass immigration. We didn't know the intricacies of her purging the party or anything. We might have assumed that the CDU, CSU was always like that. I am actually familiar with Adenauer and the FDP and their brief turn in power from my own studies of history, German history. But I will say, having understood that the right in Germany is not necessarily right-wing as it purports to be, I think I've got a better volley for you in terms of the UK's right and how despicable they are. Okay, where shall we start? Tell you what, I think it's wise to start after Churchill. We had a man in the 50s called Enoch Powell. This was happening during a period called Windrush. Windrush was after the war, and us having fought to ostensibly maintain our islands, their culture, ethnicity from foreign invaders, decided to open the borders up and invite previous members of the empire, which was at that point starting to be dissolved, mainly Caribbean. And we had a man called Enoch Powell, where he was a high Tory, managed to get the vote of the London dockers and other working class groups that were being affected, which was not, it wasn't unheard of, but it was quite rare for a conservative, particularly a high Tory, to be able to do that. And he got, it's estimated, 85% approval across the country for what he did. He's essentially an election winger. There's no reason not to field this guy in the next election, perhaps make him PM. Can you guess what they did?
I guess they just completely contained him, made a cordon sanitaire around him.
Yep, absolutely sidelined him from the party. Funnily enough, they did it with Churchill as well. In the 1950s, Churchill suggested a slogan for the Tory party, which was "Keep Britain White." Straight to the point, but by this point, the monster he had set up had essentially turned back round on him and destroyed him. They didn't want to hear anything that Churchill had to say, and he had always been considered a buffoon by the rest of the party, and it was only circumstance that could have allowed him to do what he did. Now, going forward, we then have periods of unions taking control of the country, and we get to Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher is typically conceived of as the based Iron Lady. She was a hard woman who set out to destroy the unions. However, she was also a liberal. And the closest, she essentially transformed the Tory party up until Tony Blair into the FDP. But the FDP would probably be more conservative than the Tory party was at that point. They made sure that there was, in terms of how they would then get MPs later on and the process you would have to go through, that she carried that line. There would be no more Enoch Powells or Enoch Powell Lights past this juncture. And that's the 80s. We also had a group called the National Front, I believe, that was growing and growing fast. One of those parties that sort of comes up very quickly. And their constant thing was immigration, immigration, immigration. We want it gone. Margaret Thatcher promised that she would reduce immigration, did the opposite, and by the end of, I think, her reign as Prime Minister, the national action had been banned despite her riding on the coattails and momentum of that group that was then agitating in that direction. Then we get to Tony Blair. Tony Blair decides that he's going to, well, we all know who Tony Blair is. He's essentially the devil. He opens up the borders for real this time, massively. That's when we start mass immigration. That's when it becomes a big issue. The Tory party at the time, there's a famous conversation between then Tory MP, I think, Jonathan Bowden, and Michael Gove, who's still an MP. And he said to Gove, "Isn't it terrible what Labour is doing to this country?" And he said, "Oh, very much so. It's awful, but it would be un-British to do anything about it." At that point, I assume Jonathan Bowden decided he wasn't British and founded the BNP, which we've discussed before. The Tory party then gets back in by Cameron, and he says he's going to limit immigration to 50,000. Instead, he decides not to do that at all, but legalise gay marriage. And we followed that trend of them positing themselves as positioning as anti-woke, and then carrying on all of the woke things that they stood against, ostensibly. And this is, I think it's going to be hard to really draw a distinction between our two parties in terms of which one is worse, because if you look at American plans post-World War II, the centre-right party, if we understand America as the global American empire and global homo and all the baggage that comes along with that concept, centre-right parties are key to that transformation. It's essentially boiling the frog. A vote for the CDU, CSU. I'd almost say it's worse than voting for Labour or voting for your equivalent, because at least people know what's happening. When people vote for the CDU, CSU, it might not happen now, but there's a large contingent that just goes back to sleep. They vote CSU, everything's fine.
Yeah, I think it's probably the same in Great Britain, but in Germany, basically the only voters for the CDU is the age group that is now slowly drying off, and it's those who like either have always voted for the CDU or are living completely in the political cinematic universe narrative. We made a tweet today where we basically said the exact same thing. You see a normie. The normie sees a CSD for the first time, Christopher Street Day, and is completely disgusted by it. And then he thinks, all right, now it's enough. Now, finally, I will vote for the CDU to end this stuff. And in reality, the CDU wants to also take part in the CSD. And the only ones that actually come out and say, no, we actually want to ban it, are the AfD youth. So, yeah, it's exactly the same. The narrative is way too strong, but it's already crumbling, at least in Germany, because we have a AfD. To what extent it can actually achieve anything, because as it's usual, they completely make a cordon sanitaire around it. So maybe at least on the local level you can change something, but on the federal level,
Before we get on to that, just quite quickly, I'd heard before, we were all here, I was amongst them, the populace had won, we had triumphs in the elections, and we were now going to escape our German masters. We believed you to be that. And we thought it was all you, actually, who were inflicting this. Yeah, we did. That was naive. And what we didn't realize was that we were running to America, not realizing it was, a skin suit. And it's been said that when we left the EU, because of our role in World War II, we maintained this relationship of essentially being America's little lapdog that goes in and, whips you all into doing the USA's bidding. And that when we left the EU, paradoxically, it became a little less gay. Is that the case?
I wouldn't say that. I don't know if it's really the center for that. I can't really speak about that, but nothing really changed. But there's one thing, one phenomenon that we don't really have here. Maybe our equivalent would be the CDU boomer that just wants to grill and finally put an end to all this wokeness by voting CDU. But you have the phenomenon of the Tory boy. And I think when I first stumbled over this concept or caricature over AA, but maybe you can talk a bit about that, make fun of the Tory boy.
There's two types. One is it's almost split on ethnic grounds, where the Tory boy who is a native Brit, I mean, I don't know how to characterize him, but I'd almost say a fearful creature. It's not like they don't have these same instincts and pulls towards our ideas, but there's this stopping point that essentially scares them, where I believe things have gone so far that their primary driver at this point is cowardice and trying to maintain the gains that they've got, and they wish so desperately that they can integrate these people that come in. I think it's mainly because they see that as the only feasible option, and therefore it has to work. Because if it doesn't work, I don't think they want to countenance the alternative. So when they see Ahmed in a 3 lion shirt and the 3 lions themselves are all Africans, they cheer it on because that's essentially the last vestige of Britain they can hold on to. They are not afraid if you are, for example, a Persian rug maker with Welsh characteristics. They are not afraid of calling you out on that essential un-British aspect to you. They're very venomous about it. As soon as they are afforded an ability to act and think like that, it would almost be equivalent to, you mentioned to me once, not on a stream, that there is a lot of anti-Slav animus, and it didn't take that much to bring it out.
Yeah,
that is the
right.
same here.
Yeah, as I noticed the same with mostly FDP guys, or even some so-called CDU conservatives. They were like, when you see them normally, they talk, we shouldn't discriminate, all people are the same, and we shouldn't hate, and oh, those evil AfD guys with their hate, and whoa. And as soon as the Ukraine update dropped, they were throbbing at the mouth with hatred against Russia, because finally you were allowed to hate something. And yeah, it's probably the same phenomenon, but we don't really have a name for that. It's I think the name Tory boy is brilliant. It's yeah, we need something like that as well. But I think it's always a you always have this kind of worm man in your society. It doesn't matter if it's communist or whatever we have right now. There's always
just a suggestion on the name. I think the best way to do it would be, you know how the Norwegians have the word quisling, which is synonym for traitor. Why don't you just start calling them Merkels?
Merkel boys.
Yeah, Mooties.
Mooties. So this is also really interesting, how strong the pull of the or the stickiness of the PCU is, because right now the top CDU candidate, Friedrich Merz, a literal BlackRock airdrop, and he poses himself as a really conservative, tough guy, complete West German slime sack. I hate basically everything about him because he does the grift perfectly, posing himself as the tough man on conservative issues and whatever, and the left completely swallows it. I mean, they do their part in the PCU narrative and saying, oh no, with Merz we're gonna get Mustache Man 2.0 or whatever. And in reality, he's even more left-wing than Angela Merkel. I mean, if Angela Merkel from 2008 was transported to right now, saying what she said back then, she probably would like get yeeted out of the party by him or whatever. So it's amazing how well this narrative can be spun. But I have a personal feeling. I don't know if that is actually happening or it's just like wishful thinking on my part, but I feel like that this narrative is slowly crumbling, and the AfD actually does the most sensible thing possible and completely hammers it onto the CDU, and the most like many of the like intelligent politicians figured out that their main enemy is not the Green Party, it is the CDU, and they are hammering it. So at least we got some competency there, and yeah, it's going to be interesting. The biggest difference between Germany and Britain right now, I think, is that you guys have absolutely nothing, and standing in front of a system that is going left on a complete accelerator. Maybe, as AA predicts right now, you get with the little Blair, what's his name, Keir Starmer, you get like some competent anti-woke measures, but in the end, yeah, you don't believe AA on that.
I think, if and I say this with great respect for the man, I think that he has. You know that IQ curve thing, right? Where the guy at the bottom of the IQ curve says one thing, the middle says something, and then the high IQ says what the least intelligent guy says again.
Yeah.
With Tony Blair, this is the first case I can think of where that's actually the bad thing to be, because Tony Blair's appeal was he was this very charming little man who just wanted the best for everyone and would do the most pragmatic thing in the room, and then you automatically go away. He's the man who's for me because I'm pragmatic and I know what pragmatic things are. I think in his very intelligent elite theory way, he has managed to get himself back to that position. And he sees in Blair this man who will fix everything because he's competent. No, he's the devil.
Yeah.
Right? You are Faust. You are doing the Faust thing, but it's not going to be a happy ending. I assume Faust got a happy ending. I never watched it. But
well, there's one version where he gets a happy ending and one version where he gets literally dragged to hell. But I think the second one, where he gets dragged to hell, is the most realistic one, because we're experiencing that right now.
Yes. And with this guy, Keir Starmer, who's essentially a face for Blair, is saying we're going to be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Here's the thing.
No, where have I heard that one before?
Even if this man was to reduce immigration by 50%, and he got rid of the woke shit, it's still happening. You're just not seeing it. It's like with Maloney. You know, she brings 400,000 of these guys, and that was a bit more public. But my general rule is, if he is presented to you, if you see him on his screen, if he comes up in your feed, if he's being talked about in a negative way by the media for being too right-wing, he's a rat. And he's there to deceive you. It's containment. You know, Andrew Tate, for example. I mean, I'll give you an example of the opposite. We have in this country, and bear in mind, it's just a way to get yourself on the Fed's database. But we have groups that go around to all of the migrant hotels, and, you know, they've done things to people. I can't say on YouTube, but they've done bad things, and you get these mass rallies outside of them. Or you get, you know, they drop a banner and it says something provocative. They stop doing it very, very quickly because they found far too much of the audience agreed in the comments section. And it was ridiculous. If you go online now, you might not get it, but in my country, you get when you go on your search engine, you get recommended articles. And sometimes I scroll down and I try to find one with a, let's say, woke message, or even if they're denouncing the evil people. I can't find one where it's positively received, and it's always people agreeing with what they're not supposed to agree with, even in the most extreme terms, at a ratio of about 80%. So they do not show, and they will not show anything that posits too hard a right message. And you'll notice that with a lot of these guys, they will never broach certain topics. And they're terrible on the topics that really matter, but they will throw red meat at you. And I can only imagine that, and I hate to say it, but I don't think the AfD will save you at all.
No. I mean, It's this is also clear to many inside the AfD. Even if by some miracle tomorrow the AfD gets like 51% in whole general election, and then you have a AfD government. All right, what will happen? If they do too many based things, well, maybe you get disconnected from the SWIFT network. Or if they want to do like something about immigration, then they just, the so-called intelligence community from America just digs up dirt on somebody, and well, then that thing doesn't happen anymore. I think it's basic knowledge right now, but the whole system, how it's described in the books, that you get out, get votes, people vote from you, and then the will of the people is respected, and the leaders must conform. We've seen time and time again and again that this is exactly the opposite of what actually happens, where you have people in overwhelming numbers agreeing on something, and the exact opposite is actually happening. Immigration, for example, it's slowly there's setting in a, not really a defeatism, because that would be bad. It's like a realization that, all right, we can maybe get the votes, we can play the system as good as it is, try to like exist within it, and maybe get some money from that, or use it to basically build up infrastructure, or just get out the message, even if it's just as simple as that. And yeah, that is a good thing, and that is one of the best things about the AfD, is that it actually gets money from the state, because we have a regulation in Germany that if you get so and so many votes, you get so and so much money from the state. So if you have a competent leadership in the AfD, this money can then be siphoned into good friendly projects. Yeah, that is probably the only good thing about the AfD, because it's not going to change much, even if it is getting in power, because you have such a big, powerful machine against it, and it's probably just gonna get, like, even Meloni. People here in Germany were completely freaking out, especially the left, because they said, "Oh, she's a post-fascist," and the left got really, really agitated. And yeah, what do the actual post-fascists do? Increase immigration, maybe do some token anti-woke stuff here and there, and yeah, great.
I tell you what, they got the post part right, didn't they?
Yeah. They're so fascist, they actually return to being liberal or whatever. Like, I don't know.
Well, it is said in fascist doctrine, if you read into it far enough, that if everything is socially constructed, which is actually a principle they work off, an a priori, race doesn't exist and the nation is only useful insofar as it unites people. So by the time you got to the end of fascist thought, there were already people going, let's drop the Italy thing and do Roman. So I am 100% convinced that if Italy somehow won the World War, we would be celebrating Gay Pride Month with a Roman twist. But
at least you have like a Roman helmet on the drag queen, so
oh yeah, fascies everywhere. It's going to be so based, man.
Based Romans. So yeah, that is a very blackpilling, podcast.
I will say the best option, really, despite our comparatives of which one's the most woke. They're clearly not. I don't know the case. Maybe with the CDU, CSU, it's different. But in our case, the Tory party, and this is my disagreement with AA, is clearly not competent. And the fact that we exist at all and are speaking today is, somewhat testament to that. And if it's not competent, that means, in a way, they can be beaten and maneuvered around. I wouldn't expect to be able to do the same thing with nearly as much ease if it was a Tony Blair in charge. And that's in terms of, followers, numbers, being able to actively do things.
Yeah.
So perhaps the best option next election is not to vote AFD, but SDP or SPD, whatever it's called.
No. In Germany, it's actually the way other way around, because the left, the Greens and the SPD, they are completely incompetent. Like their WEF airdrop leaders, like Baerbock or whatever, they are so incompetent. Like they embarrass themselves every turn they take. And at least in the CDU, you had halfway decent people that managed to at least look competent and managed. I mean, when they're in power, I think it's basically what Blair does. They do all the left-wing things, but they at least look like businessmen doing business. And right now, we just have children. We have complete children. Thing is, though, I would still continue to recommend people to vote AfD, because with that, you basically give money to good right-wing people. So at least there's that. And we can be pretty sure about that.
The real sting with our party, as I mentioned before, we had Boris Johnson in charge, and Johnson positioned himself to the people as this quasi-libertarian, where we would get the government out of the way and we wouldn't put harsh restrictions and mandates down. So when COVID came around, he got sucked in like many politicians do. George Bush Jr. comes to mind, is that he gets sucked in by the Churchill myth, where there's this national crisis and it has to be resolved. Now, I don't think this is a man who allegedly did not read his briefings and had them summarized by his assistants. But the Tony Blair Institute and places like that are waiting in the wings. They go in and they say, oh, we've got a plan for all of this. You just need to listen to us. The information they were given, it was 3 studies from China, and this was enough to dictate public policy, one of which was done by someone who was a graduate student, I believe, in China, and they dropped out of the course. So this was the level, the thoroughness, the veracity of the information that was given to Boris Johnson, and he determined this would be sufficient, along with another politician whose name I forget, who's an I'm celebrity. He took the fall for all of this later. We then went into a lockdown that wasn't the harshest. I think you might have been harsher, but having said that, it was still something that I think, on the one hand, you had the Tory boy myth, which came out pretty strong, saying that clap for Boris. We had a moment like that, clapping for the NHS, where everyone came out at the same point every Wednesday or something, and we all stood outside and had to clap. And if you didn't clap, then the neighbours would see. And we ended up in a very strange place there in terms of public psychology.
Wait. You clapped every Wednesday outside for the NHS?
Yes, the bell chimed and we all had to stand up and go outside and line up so the neighbours would see. We all just clapped in dead silence.
That actually happened?
Like 5 minutes. Yes.
I refuse to believe that.
Well, it happened for a month, 2 months maybe. Everyone got outside and we just stood there, dead silence. Everyone looked to see who was present.
That really reminds me of the Václav Havel piece where he writes about Workers of the World Unite banners that every shop had to put up. And nobody believed actually on it, but you did it because you didn't want to be seen not hanging it up and getting a visit by secret police. So interesting.
Yes.
Really interesting.
An artifact of this, if you care to look it up after, is one guy disgruntled that the NHS, which is typically seen as a left-wing thing, came out one day with a pot and a pan. He looked like your typical North FC individual, and he starts banging them together, demanding that everyone come out and clap for Boris. So that was a strange artifact of the time. But
this whole Corona situation really feels like a fever dream right now. I mean, there was so much weird shit going on. I mean, wow. Even here, but I mean, here we had a CDU government and SPD, but whatever, they are basically the same party, and they managed to do the veneer of competency pretty well. We didn't have that craziness. We had a institute, the Robert Koch Institute, that basically did all the policy, whatever, and I mean, the whole time they managed to get at least look competent to the normie. It was still basically the same bullshit you guys did, but not as crazy. So interesting.
Oh, I don't know what else to say other than it was, if you lived it over here, you suddenly understand a lot of things a lot better in terms of how things can happen.
Yeah, that was, I mean, looking back at it, this was a real watershed years. Like, so many misconceptions about like people in general, the masses, and how our system actually works were just irreparably, completely washed away. Like, just seeing how people react to that, and like the whole insanity and what idiotic measures they were willing to follow. I mean, you completely lost. I mean, at least I did. Completely lose faith in any form of mass movement or mass organization or mass government or whatever.
We called it the final nail in the coffin for populism.
Yeah,
that's essentially what it was. That, and I don't want to end it with me cutting you off like that. So, what would the outro be, do you reckon?
Yeah.
Shall we make a verdict on
we after all this blackpilling talk, we got to at least give some white pilling things. So yeah, at least one white pill from each of us. So you go first.
White pill. Okay. Well, the thing that I would consider a white pill is, with the death of populism, the right has gotten a lot more serious, a lot more realistic, understanding that there aren't necessarily solutions in the traditional political way. And we have done a lot in the past few years doing practical things and realizing that what we were doing before was ineffective and a time waster. So with a more serious right in places like the UK, which is growing, we're able in the future, I think, to do a lot more things which will actually be able to step outside of boomer truth and into something that works. So that's what I would say is a white pill from the heart of darkness, which I now accept as the UK. So what about you?
Yeah, you cannot believe on the old myths anymore, and it really pushed a lot of people into really thinking different about all these situations. Back then, you really thought, I mean, even I thought, well, just go to a party and just get more people and then something will change. But this is completely gone, completely. And I think it's a good thing, because finally the right has to question its own narratives. It has to question the narrative given to it by the regime. And we can finally maybe talk about the truth and maybe get actual organization going. So, yeah.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that.
If COVID proved anything, it's that the second you're in power, the masses will be with you, and you won't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah. You have, I think, the Tory boy is just like one facet of this kind of personality, because I guess there's also a left-wing similar person, left-leaning, and I guess it was the same with Corona. Just a new update dropped. Like we had it hygiene concepts, like the word hygiene concept. Most normies never ever even probably heard about that word, and suddenly it dropped. It was the thing. Like everybody made a hygiene concept, and it was basically just like, wear a mask and be social distance and whatever. It's a complete useless stuff most of the time, but it was a hygiene concept. It was the thing. And the only reason anybody talked about it is because like the people in authority started talking about it. So yeah, as you said, as soon as you have authority in the eyes of the masses, they're just gonna do whatever. Like they don't have any principle.
The most egregious one was, I think, a week apart. Piers Morgan goes and says we need to lock down, and a man with a master's degree who works for the Scottish government, I believe, comes on and says, no, locking down is ridiculous. It's stupid. It's completely out of line with the science, and therefore we will not be doing it. I am the expert. Within a week, literally a week, he comes out and says the exact opposite. The science had been given an update.
Yeah.
A lot of money was involved in this update.
No, you don't say the quiet part out loud. You know, shouldn't do that.
All right. Well,
I mean, we had the same situation in Germany where in the beginning we had state media doing like reports or like satire shows where they said like, oh yeah, this whole Corona thing is a right-wing ploy by the AfD to shut down borders, and it's like and then just like overnight, like literally overnight, the whole thing switched. It was crazy. It's weird. It's completely weird.
I tell you what, I believed the Biden campaign when they said under no circumstances would they take the Trump vaccine. And by the way, just quickly on, you said there wasn't a term for lefty Germans, you know, the Tory boy type, but on the left for Germany. We actually do have a word for that, for the German ones, or a phrase. We just call them smug Germans.
Smug Germans. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The smug German archetype is what we call Wessis, like a West German archetype. It's the West German. It fits well. You have this basically Green Party voting who lives in a shitty area in the Ruhrpott. Maybe not even that shitty. Maybe even a 99% white area suburb somewhere. Actually pretty nice. Votes Green Party. Has a middle income job. Maybe even works for the government. And then he watches the evening news every night, and there he sees like report after report about like those poor East Germans. I mean, they just, you know, we just lost them. We need to talk to them right again, and maybe like teach them some democracy or whatever. And they need some structural investment, because look at them, they're so poor, and and they sit there and are so fucking smug about it. And I've seen several of those type, and I guess they are our version of the left-wing Tory boy, because
I appreciate their arrogance, but despise their pride.
Yeah.
Like it's I mean, can you explain to me just quickly what's going on with Saxony? What's going on down there? I've heard things.
Yeah, Saxony and Thuringia are interesting because they have like 30% AfD, I think, people voting for it. And in even back in 2018, where they had already in some counties 30% vote for the AfD, and send a direct candidate into the Bundestag, which is really shocking for them, for the establishment. Yeah, why does that happen? I guess it's many factors. One of them is that most people there didn't get the re-education most West Germans got. The Russians, they were brutal, but they were typical Russians. Like they just rounded up everybody who dissented and shot them, and that's it. And I mean, it's a typical Russian way of doing things. They were not doing it like the Americans with the soft kiss of death, where America just loves you so much they kill you. And in Russia, in the Russian occupied zone, it was way more brutal. They actually just like reused certain camps. But after the 50s, they tried to like, I mean, they weren't as, let's call it, gay. They were still very destructive on the cultural side, but yeah.
I think we should all appreciate that communism got into a gay competition with America, and America won.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's a
Like,
good way of putting it. But
I've heard it conceived in. Yeah, go on.
most people that vote for the AfD there grew up in a regime where it was so blatantly obvious that it's just lies from beginning to end. There was like they reading between the lines was basically a common skill that everybody needed to know, and getting what they are not talking about. Like when the party put out a paper and it said, "Oh, we had so much industrial development this year, and it's a great breakthrough of socialist engineering," and whatever. Everybody reading it was like, "All right, so what are they not telling?" So it's basically a bad year in everything else, you know. That's a kind of mindset they developed, and it was basically because the whole propaganda machine wasn't as, it was sophisticated, it was brutal, but it wasn't as refined, let's say that, as it is today. So when a East German reads a normal left-wing paper like Spiegel or whatever, sees the same tactics used again, they're like, "Oh, wait a minute." And it doesn't just work on them. So they, the more they try to smear them, the more they actually say, "Well, I guess I'm right." And the other part is like seeing pictures of some East German small towns from the 90s, where I had like completely rundown inner cities, even bullet holes from World War II still left. And then 20 years later, you have a beautiful city, completely renovated. You have, at least in Saxony and many regions, complete full employment. There are some problem regions because, like, you know, a part of Germany just cut off there. So it's now a borderland where it was usually a middle land, like, you know, that caused some problems where it just like cut off. Like there's one city, for example, which is completely divided. Like one part of the city is still in Germany and the other part of the city is in Czech Republic. No, Poland. So, you know, it's obviously going to cause some problems. But in general, it made a complete beautiful transformation, and the people are pretty proud of it, as they should be. And they're not going to let any arrogant West German come there and say, "Oh, you're just so stupid. We need to teach you the democracy," or whatever. Like they're just going to think like, "Shut up, Wessie," you know. That's all. That's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why the AfD just became so popular so quickly there, because most people there, they build up something and they don't want to lose it because some weird-ass politician in Berlin makes crazy laws, and they really, really don't want to get told by a snobbish hippie living in his Ruhrpott shithole how to live life and what is actually meant to like really live democracy or whatever. That's the short version, the 5-minute short version.
The most based right-wing option, if you were alive back then, it would have been to jump over to the east side of the wall, I think.
Nah, I wouldn't say that. It's, of course, you have this nostalgia effect, but it was still really bad. I mean, you didn't have like global homo subversion. Like it was, you basically had no immigration, and when you had immigration, like I think they let in a couple of Chileans after Allende got yeeted. It was basically just a time contract. Like, all right, you're gonna stay here as long as Pinochet is on ruling, and once he's gone, you just pack your things and get out. And that was like common sense. As I said, the East, the socialist regimes, they had their own. They had so many crazy, stupid things they did, but they didn't do the stupid immigration thing. Like they were not hell-bent on suiciding their own population. So,
well, just to end it off then,
yeah.
I think we could finish on this, which is to say that my understanding, because I had to do your post-war period in school, and one of the things that got brought up was the immigration of the Turks, you know, these workers, and contrasting it with the East Germans. And in East Germany, they bring a bunch of Vietnamese in, you know, NBA types.
Yeah.
And I think Chinese as well, to Poland, and they kick them out straight after. And not only that, but they go back and end up spreading Christianity to their respective countries, right?
Nice.
I mean, there's something like 300 million Chinese Christians because of this, and it's one of the things that Xi Jinping is most terrified of. But in Germany, the other Germany, West Germany, you have these Turkish workers come in, residential workers, and to my knowledge, they didn't go back.
No, when you talk to like actual Turks, they don't want to either back. Like the Turks we have here are a completely different breed, and yeah, it's a difficult situation, and yeah.
I tell you what, this has been the most pleasant interrogation I have ever been subjected to.
Yeah.
And I hope that's maybe at least provided some entertainment and context to the respective situations of our countries. But I reckon if we carry this on any longer, I'm set for the record for the longest podcast on your channel. Yeah. And I don't think that should be given to an Anglo just out of respect.
Yeah, so, I think. Yeah, I mean, we aimed for half an hour. Now we are almost like 1.5 hours. So, yeah. Well, all right. So thank you for coming, and I hope you guys found it interesting, even though it's a German channel in English, and yeah, interesting stuff, interesting comparison, and yeah, let's see what happens in the future. All right, take care.
Cheers.